Thank you very much. Thank you everyone for attending this evening's Learning and Culture Security Scrutiny meeting for the 15th of October. Just a few items before we get cracking with tonight's meeting. So firstly, please can I remind all participants that this meeting will be recorded and copy archived for future viewing. Could all participants mute themselves when not speaking in order to avoid any background noise or feedback when other participants are speaking. If a participant wishes to speak, can they please put their hand up if they can be seen on screen, or use the chat function. And then if any participant has any difficulty hearing or being heard when they are addressing the committee, they should let the chairman, myself, or the democratic officer know. So that's Gareth and Catherine. If they have a webcam, then they should try turning this off, as this will help the broadband or Wi-Fi bandwidth so they can at least hear and be heard. So welcome everyone, all committee members, officers and registered public speakers, and thank you for attending. So before we start as well, I understand that one of the people who would like to attend this meeting as the Welsh Media Medication member, Mr. H. Gapper, can't make the 5 p.m. because it's a little too early for him. So one of the questions we would want to move this committee meeting to the de facto time across all scrutiny committees to 6 p.m. I have no issue with moving it to 6 p.m. 5 p.m. is usually better for people to be more engaged, but 6 p.m. is good for everyone who might have a difficulty getting out of work on time. So I don't know if anyone has any objections moving to 6 p.m. If no one has any objections, then the next meeting will be at 6. Councillor Hunter-Jarvie, would you like to chime in?
Yes, I think we're all very happy with 5 o'clock. I'm not quite sure why you want to go to 6 o'clock.
Well, it's just for one individual who can't make it. Gordon?
I'm afraid that's not good enough. If the rest of us prefer 5 o'clock, I'm sorry, but stick with 5 o'clock.
Okay. Councillor Gordon-Kemp?
Yes, Chairman, I'm happy to stick with 5 o'clock. Yeah, I suggested it last year. I think members found, everyone found it convenient. I'm always conscious that the longer and the later meeting goes on, the tighter people become, and perhaps decisions are not looked at and reached in perhaps the best possible way. I'm also conscious of officers who have been working during the day. So I'm happy to stay at 6 o'clock. Sorry, 5 o'clock. And I think you said that all other scrutinies meet at 6. I think the Social Services Committee still meets at 5, and of course planning meets at 4 o'clock.
Okay, Jane?
I'm quite happy to stay at 5. And as for all other scrutinies, actually licensing meets at 10 o'clock in the morning. So I don't think you can say 6 o'clock is a blanket one. 5 o'clock means at least you can have a tidy finish and have a late dinner, rather than if you finish at 6 o'clock, you either have to have an early dinner or a very late dinner. And as Councillor Kemp said, the longer it goes on, the more tired people get, and the less, I would think, constructive debate comes forward.
Okay.
Chairman, Councillor Hodges here.
Can we just have Dr. Martin Price first, and then we can go to you?
I'd prefer 6 o'clock. I think it's the end of a working day rather than 5. It's a bit. I can understand why Mr. Gapper feels, given that he works full time, that 6 o'clock is a better time for him. It will be better for me as well.
Councillor Hodges?
Thank you, Chairman. 6 would be better, I think, because we are a committee that actually seeks and invites people from, outside the committee to join us, and then to say with one hand, "I'm sorry, you've got to get your act together." He has an important job he's got to do, and if he can't get away, I value his experience on this committee, and I'd like it to be 6. Thank you.
Okay, does anyone else have it feels as if it's very split in terms of Councillor Jarvie?
Can I suggest that you take a vote on this so that we can make some progress, Chairman?
That is fine, that's exactly what I was going to come to. Okay, how would you like to do it, Gareth? And Catherine, how would you like to do the vote? Everyone that's...
As is just a general committee item, Chair, we just do it alphabetical preference. So if people say the preference 5 or 6 p.m, and then we'll jot down the numbers and we'll collate it at the end of the vote.
Okay, and is it everyone who's attending?
I'll have to be, Chair.
Oh,
yeah.
Okay. Do you have the list, Gareth?
I'll go through the names now. Yeah, I'll do it alphabetically. Okay.
Okay, no problem.
I'll start off with you, Chair. Your preference 5 or 6 p.m?
6 p.m.
Councillor Birch, 5 or 6 p.m?
5 p.m.
5, yep. Okay, Councillor Hodges, 5 or 6 p.m?
6, please.
Okay. Councillor Jarvie?
5, please.
Okay. Councillor Kemp?
I'll give it 5.
Okay. Councillor Norman?
5.
Okay. Councillor Parker? 5 or 6 p.m?
5.
Councillor Perks? 5 or 6 p.m?
5.
Councillor Rowlands?
5.
Councillor Thomas?
At 5.
Dr. Price?
6.
Okay. Judy Lynch-Wilson? Judy?
I have no preference, but I'd say 5. 5.
Okay, and Mr. Isaac Cram?
5, please.
5. Okay, Tot enough, Chair, can clearly see that the preference is for 5 p.m.
Okay, that's brilliant. Okay, that's good. Thank you very much, all. And with that, now we can move on to agenda item 1, which is apologies for absence. I've got anyone holding their hand up?
We have had apologies from Mr. Hugh Gapper due to the start time of the meeting, but no other apologies received.
Okay, thank you very much. And then agenda item 2, minutes of the meeting held on the 17th of September. Does anyone would like to, I propose to move those? Anyone second?
I'd like to move the minutes.
Thank you. Seconder?
I'm happy to second.
Okay. Thank you very much. And then on to number 3, which is receive declarations of interest. I cannot see anyone with any hands up. Okay. Thank you very much. And as Paula is with us, we can move straight on now to agenda item 4, which is a reference from Cabinet, which is the update of the proposals to increase the number of primary school places in Cowbridge to meet the increased demand as a result of recent and proposed housing developments. Who would like to take this? Paula?
Matthew Curtis is going to present this, Chair.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you, Matthew.
Thank you, Chair. So yes, the purpose of the reference is to ensure that scrutiny members can provide feedback as part of the current consultation on the proposal to meet demand for primary education in Cowbridge. The minutes of the meeting will be attached to the consultation report that will be sent to Cabinet following the end of the consultation. So I just wanted to give an overview of the proposal and the feedback we've received to date. So the proposal dates back to the 4th of November 2019, when Cabinet approved the phased approach to expanding primary provision in Cowbridge. So phase 1 would focus on expanding English medium primary provision, with phase 2 focusing on Welsh medium primary provision. We had to review this holistically, because obviously we have limited sites available to us within the area. So we looked at the education sites in the first instance, as is usually the process. So we first looked at the existing primary school sites we have in Cowbridge, and then we also considered Cowbridge Comprehensive School site, as well as the proposed Darren Farm site that would be transferred to us on a Section 106 agreement. So firstly, when we reviewed the existing primary school sites, Iolo Morgannwg site or the Abontfine primary school site were not determined large enough to, well, they're not determined feasible for us to expand provision on them. That's simple with the Iolo Morgannwg site because it's just not big enough with no real external space for us to construct a new school. And then with the Abontfine site, it is large enough to hold a 420 place primary school. The main concerns with that site would be the impact this would have on the local infrastructure, given that it's very narrow roads that lead to that site. The other issue was the topography of that site and access for construction on a live school site, which would obviously have to work in tandem. Cowbridge Comprehensive School site then was determined to be sufficient in terms of space to construct a 420 place primary school, and there were multiple options in terms of site options on there. And then the Darren Farm site was also considered large enough for up to a 420 place primary school. Following the consideration of those sites, Cowbridge Comprehensive School site was determined to be the preferred site for the English medium expansion. This is because there's an existing English medium school on that site, and the Welsh medium expansion was proposed for the Darren Farm site. That being because firstly, the land isn't currently owned by the council. It will be transferred to us upon 150 dwellings being occupied on that development, which is still some time away. And obviously the key concern was meeting English medium provision in Cowbridge, which is already very tight. And also the other benefit of the Darren Farm site was the improved access, given that it's on the outskirts of the town. And it has good access to the A48. It was considered suitable for a Welsh medium expansion, given the much larger catchment area for Welsh medium primary. So we previously consulted on a proposal to establish a 3 to 19 all-through school on the Cowbridge Comprehensive School site, which would accommodate 420 primary places and 96 part-time nursery places. This would have resulted in a Abontfine primary school transferring from from its existing site into this 3 to 19 school. This would have provided the council with the required English medium primary capacity, but also would have provided the opportunity to address the existing condition and suitability of the buildings that Abontfine are in. However, following the consultation, there were significant concerns raised by staff, governors, parents and members of the community. So we reviewed all the approaches available to us to deliver the required capacity, which was the main driver of this proposal. So we identified an alternative approach, which would result in the 210 additional English medium primary places, and that proposal was approved by Cabinet on the 9th of March for a consultation exercise to be undertaken. That proposal was specifically on changing the age range of Cowbridge Comprehensive School to 3 to 19 as an all-through school. We would have constructed a new 210 place primary school building on that site, and that would accommodate the capacity. And then the Abontfine primary school would remain as is with its existing capacity. So the benefit of that proposal is obviously that it meets the demand, but it also ensures that we retain the Darren Farm site for the future Welsh medium expansion that would be further down the line in Band C of the 21st Century Schools programme. So we launched the consultation through the consultation document on the 16th of March 2020. Because of COVID-19, obviously all schools closed from the 23rd of March. So we made the decision to keep the consultation open during that period, but we removed the end date, which was originally going to be, I think, on the 1st of May. The reason why we kept the consultation open was to ensure that consultees could continue to submit feedback and review the documentation. We didn't think it would be good to remove all of that documentation from the website and launch it at a later date. We felt that it was better from a transparency perspective for people to continue to read that information, digest it and respond. So on the 7th of September then, we notified consultees that we had set a new end date, which was the 18th of October. And we also advised them that any submissions received up till that point would still be counted and they wouldn't need to resubmit. We were advised last week that some parents of Cowbridge Comprehensive School didn't receive notification of the end date. That there's an email sent by the school on the 9th of September, but for some reason, some people didn't receive that. We can only believe it's a technical issue. So to ensure consultees had sufficient time, we decided to further extend the consultation, so it will now end on the 23rd of November. So in terms of the response to date, as of today, we've received 113 responses. 48% are in favour of the proposal and 51% do not support the proposal, and 1% have not indicated an opinion either way. So the main purpose of the consultation is for people to raise any issues in relation to the proposal so they can be addressed and fed back by the council. So kind of a summary of the key issues to date, and these are the main themes, are that people are against the all-through school model and have concerns about the evidence around the all-through school model, against the capacity changes and the admissions requirement, the admissions process that would be in place. There are also residents who have concerns around about the traffic implications of the proposal. There are also issues with the lack of investment at Abontvain, and that stated that that doesn't align with the goals of the 21st Century Schools programme. And then there were also issues with the consultation process that's been followed. So I'll just go through those each in more detail, just to provide a bit of information from the council's perspective. So in terms of the all-through school model, as I mentioned earlier, the Cowbridge Comprehensive School site was identified as the preferred option for English medium expansion. When we were looking at the education model, we reviewed other sites around the Vale where we have more than one school sharing an existing site. So we have a school, Gymraeg Bro Morgannwg, which is an all-through school with a primary and secondary phase. We also have Llantwit Learning Community, which is 2 primary schools and a secondary school that share a single site. And we have Penarth Learning Community, which is a comprehensive school and an all-through special school that share a single site. So when we looked at those three, we felt that the all-through school model provided greater opportunities to maximise the facilities across a single site with a single management team that's responsible. That allows a shared approach to the management of the site, including parking, drop-off and pick-up, and management of the school day timings. It is something that has been fed back to us from Llantwit Learning Community and Penarth Learning Community that there are issues in terms of the management of the site, and there has been conflict in the past between those governing bodies in terms of drop-off and pick-up arrangements. So that was the main driver in determining the education model. We don't state anywhere that we think it is a better education model or it does produce better education outcomes, but it does have a number of benefits. It is also a model that we're seeing more regularly in Wales. We have 21 all-through schools to date and another 5 are due to open in the next 3 years as a result of consultations. And the other benefits we see in terms of the model is the consistent vision and values across the site, consistent engagement with parents, primary and secondary, opportunities for continued professional development by teaching across a full range of phases. The transition between Key Stage 2 and 3 is improved through the all-through model by being part of that and that automatic transfer from year 6 to 7. Single accountability regimes, you'd have one single challenge advisor and you'd have one single inspection from Estin across the entire school. There are opportunities for cost efficiencies as a result of economies of scale as well. And just to note really that benefit isn't from the council's perspective. Both the primary and secondary phase would receive the funding through the funding formula, which would still give a primary allocation and a secondary allocation, which would be the same regardless of whether it was an all-through school or not. The benefit there is from a school perspective, from making those economies of scale, which would free up more money that can be spent on education purposes. and it also removes duplication of data returns, such as the PLASC returns and other returns to Welsh Government. So we feel that the model would allow the school to continue performing well while catering for a larger pupil cohort. The key driver isn't to address issues with education performance, which is the case with some of the all-through school models that haven't worked well across Wales. It was just noted that the staff and leadership is a real big component of whether an all-through school model will work. And of course, in the recent essay inspection for Cowbridge Comprehensive School, the leadership was determined to be excellent. So with the second part in terms of the capacity and admissions arrangements, as we noted earlier, the key driver for this is to meet projected demand because of housing developments in the area. The pupil yield from those housing developments that we've determined is by using the supplementary planning guidance figures, which has been tried and tested across developments in the Vale previously. And the key part of the English medium primary capacity being the first part to be addressed is that there is very limited capacity within the area, and that is a concern for us with the development coming up, because as pupils will come into the development, we won't have any local schools with capacity at the moment, which obviously is the reason why to ensure we meet our statutory duty. So some responses have noted that the COVID-19 impact would delay the development of those houses, but we see no reason why those developments won't come through and won't be completed through the period of the LDP plan. And obviously, given the nature of the area and the fact there are limited spaces, we need to plan in advance to make sure that capacity is there for when we need it. So some responses in terms of the admission side have noted their concern about the automatic transfer of pupils from year 6 to 7 and that negatively impacting on secondary admissions across the Western Vale. However, there are very large benefits to that automatic transition in terms of pupil wellbeing and that transition, where there is often a dip in education performance. And that can help the entire school as well, because you have those year 7 pupils that have the experience of that all through school, that are able to support and help their peers that are transferred in from other primary schools across the area. We do note that the catchment area would mirror that of a Bonfire Primary School. It's a relatively small geographic area, but one that is densely populated. We don't see large numbers of out of catchment pupils being allocated a place at the school. Of course, if the number of applications do exceed the number of places available, then they would be ranked against the oversubscription criteria, which prioritises looked after children, those resident in the catchment area and those with a sibling connection before moving on to proximity to the school. We do note, however, that there could be instances where a primary pupil has moved out of the Cowbridge area or out of the catchment area, and they would be automatically transferred from year 6 into year 7. However, we don't think this would negatively impact on admissions to Cowbridge Comprehensive School, as that would be few and far between, and Cowbridge does allocate places to those who are outside the catchment as part of their admissions arrangements each year. In terms of the third point then, with regards to traffic, all of our schemes, all of our Bambi schemes that have that result in increased capacity do have an impact on transport and on the highway infrastructure. It's always going to happen when you increase the number of pupils on a site. The purposes of this proposal are to really focus on the education impacts of the proposal and the development. The benefit of the Cowbridge Comprehensive School site is it is already an existing school site, and as a secondary school it provides greater opportunities for us to address drop-off and pick-up because it is larger, and it is always a key concern for us when we are developing new primary school sites that we never have enough space or budget to provide that drop-off and pick-up that we need. And again, just to also note, I suppose the catchment area is geographically small, so a lot of pupils who would be on roll would be in walk-in distance. In terms of those wider implications for traffic and transport, the school would be subject to planning consent because it is a development of a new building. As part of that process, we would do a full transport assessment and that would assess any impacts on the local infrastructure, and that would be used as part of the design process to mitigate against any of those impacts that are identified. We would also that would also be subject to 2 consultation exercises where people could feed back on the design, and that would be through the pre-application consultation prior to submitting the planning application, where feedback could be given to us and the contractors, and then there would be a further opportunity through the formal planning application consultation as well. So on the 4th point, with regards to the investment at Bonfine and the 21st, and not aligning with the goals of the 21st Century Schools programme, obviously when we develop our Band B schemes, we assess them against the Council's investment objectives and the Welsh Government programme objectives. We have a statutory duty to provide sufficient school places, so that is always a high priority for us, and we have a lot of housing developments in the area. Where possible, we will always look to address condition of suitability at the same time, like we've done on other schemes, and that is also part of the original proposal that come forward. However, meeting our statutory duty is always the priority. Just as a kind of more general note on the Band B performance, Welsh Government have 2 main programme investment objectives. One is to provide efficient and effective educational infrastructure that will meet current and future demand for places, and the second one is in relation to community facilities. We feel that all of our schemes meet the second criteria because our buildings are designed to be adaptable and to support community use. And in relation to the first one, of course, the key driver was meeting demand for school places. However, within that investment objective, there are specific objectives in relation to condition and suitability of buildings. So I'll just give you an idea of how our overall Band B performance in these areas. So the first one is backlog maintenance. So this is to reduce backlog maintenance by 50%, which is based on the assumption that 50% of the projects would be replacements for existing buildings. 8 of our 13 Band B projects are replacements for existing buildings with additional capacity, which means that we're overperforming with 62%. We also have an additional scheme that's a refurbishment scheme, so that would actually take it to between 62 and 69% in terms of reduction of backlog maintenance. The second key objective in terms of that buildings is that you have no Category D buildings by the end of the programme. We didn't have any condition D buildings prior to the start of Band B programme, but the nearest one would have been St David's Primary School, which was a low condition grade C building, and that is being replaced as part of the programme. And then the third and final one about buildings is 25% of Category C buildings are improved to Category A or B. So at the start of Band B in April 2019, we had 14 Category C buildings. By the end of the Band B programme, we'll have 7 Category C buildings. So that's a 50% reduction, which is double the Welsh Government target. So in terms of the Council's approach to backlog maintenance and ongoing repairs and maintenance, we do have a capital allocation of £600,000 a year, which is referred to as the Asset Renewal Capital Programme. In addition to that, we've in previous years also received additional Welsh Government funding for repairs and maintenance, and that in 2019-20 that totalled 1.9 million, so a significant amount of additional funding. And of course the Band B programme in general, by building new schools, will reduce the reliance on the Asset Renewal Programme through the new buildings. So whilst the Council does understand the concerns of parents, governors and staff at Bonfine Primary School, because the buildings are in poor condition, they do have backlog maintenance. That is the case with the large number of schools across the Vale. There's 7 primary schools that do have a higher level of backlog maintenance than at Bonfine at the moment. Of course, what we would need to do is look at how we address that as part of our Asset Renewal Programme. And we need to, of course, consider our entire education estate as part of that, because as you go through those priorities and assessing schemes, we need to consider it holistically. I would also just note on that one that there have been suggestions that we should use the 5 million to refurbish schools. However, I just wanted to note that 4.1 million pounds of the 5 million pound investment is via the Section 106 agreement at Darren Farm, and that does state that the funding is specifically to provide additional school places. So it wouldn't be available to us for refurbishment of an existing building without providing those places. And then glad to know the final one then is in terms of the consultation arrangements. So the consultation it does follow Welsh Government guidelines and the School Standards and Organisation Wales Act. When schools closed on the 23rd of March, we kept the consultation going, as I outlined earlier. And we could have set the end date earlier if we wanted to get the consultation finished as soon as possible, because as part of the school organisation code, we need to include 20 school days, and they changed that definition because of the coronavirus. So we could have ended it sooner, but we didn't think that was the right thing to do in terms of getting people to fully consider the proposal. So we waited until schools opened in the autumn term in September to set that end date. And of course, as soon when we were made aware that some parents hadn't received it, we also further extended it to ensure people had that additional 42 days. So overall, consultees would have had over 250 days to consider these proposals, read the documentation and respond. So that's it in terms of an overview of what's come in to date and the Council's response. I'm not sure if anyone else has anything to add.
Okay, Councillor Hunter-Jarvie, you've got your hands up there.
Thank you, Chairman. It does occur to me that Councillor Parker and I, being governors of the comprehensive school, with the dispensation to speak, whether we should be taking part any further in this discussion, because we do have a dispensation because we represent the council, but Cambridge Comprehensive has been brought into this discussion a lot by Matthew. I'm just wondering whether we should be taking part in this any further.
Gareth and Catherine, is there any, what does the rule say?
Well, have you received dispensation, then you are able to stay and take part in the debate, so there shouldn't be an issue if you've received this dispensation from the Standards Committee.
Well, we haven't had a dispensation. It's a general dispensation that we receive as governors appointed by the local authority.
Yes, that's my understanding. So you should be okay, yes.
All right, okay, thank you.
Excellent. Before we go on, I just want to mention that there has been submissions and they've been circulated to members, and they're also available to view on the agenda on the website. Just to make clear on that. Does any of the officers want to add to Matthew Curtis's? I know we have Councillor Burnett. She would like to speak as well.
Good evening, if I can get this to work. Thank you for that, Chair. Just a couple of things to add. I mean, it might feel a bit like deja vu to the Scrutiny Committee, because we were here back on the 5th of December 2019 discussing the previous proposal, and we had lots of speakers, both for and against the then proposal, and it was very the consultation then was very illuminating, in that although that it was fairly well split in terms of for, against, whether or not we ought to be using Darren Farm, which wasn't part of the equation. But one thing that did come through, and one thing that actually Cabinet very much took on board, was the very human response to the proposition of losing a much loved school, and that went for the size of the school and the location of the school. And what people talked about was the nurturing nature of the school, and Cabinet took that very much on board, and that's why the decision was taken to develop a new proposal which would meet the demand for new places, because at the end of the day that was the main reason for developing a proposal. There wouldn't have been a bid in purely on the condition of the school, that wouldn't have met the criteria, but to meet the demand for places in Cowbridge, it was necessary to expand primary provision. And so when very strong feedback was given by people connected with the Bontvine that they actually wanted to stay as a 210 primary school, then we listened and looked at the oppositions. And because there was also a sizable number of people that actually were supportive of a 3 to 19 school, the decision was taken going forward. So I've got some other notes, but I'm quite happy to, if other people don't raise them, I'll come back in later if that's okay, rather than take up too much time now.
Does anyone have anything else before we move on to our speakers from the public? Okay. Oh, Councillor Kemp.
No, I was just going to say, Chairman, that I'd like to speak, but I would like to listen to the witnesses that you've got before commenting further.
Okay, thank you. Okay, we can move on.
I've just allocated our first speaker panelist, right? Heather Waddell, are you able to hear us, and can you turn your microphone and or camera on, please?
Yes, I am able to hear you.
Wonderful. Do you have a webcam you can share?
It would appear that my computer's camera is not playing with the system. Oh, hold on, let me see.
Here we go. Brilliant.
It works.
So you have an allocation of 3 minutes, Heather. I'll start the clock when you start speaking, and then when you've got 1 minute to go, I will just say 1 minute, just so you're aware of how much time. Okay?
Okay, thank you very much.
So when you're ready, and I'll start the clock.
Okay, thank you. Good evening. I'm a governor and also a community leader in Cowbridge. The previous objections to a primary facility on the comprehensive school site are in regard to the traffic issues, inappropriateness of social interactions across the very wide age range, and the lack of substantial space essential for the well-being of younger children and fulfilment of government guidelines to improve the health and fit, reduce obesity of same. These issues are still relevant in a proposal for a smaller school, in addition to the mention of a Bontvine. The reality is that the comprehensive site is unsuitable in many ways already repeatedly declared. There is a need for additional primary space in Cowbridge. The comprehensive site is not an appropriate setting. A proper primary very special ethos would be sacrificed and lost in a bolt-on department at a comprehensive school where there are already problems with congestion. Established facility with a committed and proven team could be extended and utilised effectively for the good of the whole community. It has the scope to accommodate a school of an appropriate size, and the recreational facilities on the comprehensive site are already during and after school hours. To cite a primary infant and nursery school further out of town than a Bontvine, it would significantly discriminate against families on Clare Gardens and other homes in that vicinity who have no transport. It is 2.2 miles to the comprehensive site from Clare Gardens, as opposed to under a mile on foot to a Bont Vine from the new housing. The former, whilst coping with small children, would be unacceptable. This, in addition to the fact that the route to the comprehensive school is with a pavement not wide enough to take a parent and child or buggy without having to step into the road to avoid others. Plans, I understand, are to develop significant affordable accommodations for those on low incomes, which is commendable and necessary. But to then expect them to undertake a round trip of some 4.5 miles each school day, potentially without a car, is discrimination against those we would want to welcome into our community. And we certainly would not wish to see the present extremely unacceptable levels of congestion and pollution increased with further buses. A Bont Vine is an established and highly regarded primary facility, which, with substantial less financial input than a new build on the comprehensive site, could be extended and improved.
We did have some issues with your audio there. So if there are any parts that members didn't hear, when Councillor Griffiths offers you the opportunity to ask questions, please do. And Heather has kindly sent a document of her representation through. I will make that available as a handout so you can all have a read of it.
Yeah, I didn't finish what I was saying, but I don't know, can you hear me now?
I can hear you, yes. What I will do, you know, you sent me that document earlier. I can make that available as a handout so all participants are able to read it and ask any questions.
Yeah, that's fine. Thank you.
I'll just do that now, but if there is any further discussion, please continue.
Does anyone have any questions for the speaker? Hiya, Sandra.
Hello, I just didn't catch Heather Weddell said she was a governor. I didn't know and hear where she was governor of.
At a Bont Vine.
Thank you.
Anyone else? If not, we can move on to the next speaker.
Okay, so Heather, I will make your statement available to view to attendees and we'll move on to the next public speaker.
Thank you.
Councillor Andrew, are you able to hear us?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
We can hear you, yes. The audio issues may have been due to webcam affecting the bandwidth. So are you okay to keep your camera off so we might be able to hear you clearly?
Well, as it happens, the GoToWebinar control panel is not allowing me to switch my camera on anyway, so you'll just have to listen.
Okay, well, the same as before. If you could, if you start speaking, I will start the clock and I will give you a notification when you've got 1 minute left.
Okay, I can now switch my camera on. Oh, you can see me now, I think. Right, good evening, everybody. My name is John Andrew. I'm a Cowbridge with Lamblethian Town Councillor and I'm speaking on behalf of the council. The proposal is to have 2 separate primary schools in Cowbridge, one which is new, has all the best facilities and provides for automatic progression to Cowbridge Comprehensive School, and one which is old, in need of refurbishment and does not provide for automatic progression to Cowbridge Comprehensive School. This is never going to work and will not be either fair or acceptable to pupils and parents. It is clear that there's a need for additional English medium primary school places in Cowbridge, but what is less clear is the extent of that need. Looking at the estimated future demand, it seems to most people difficult to justify the high cost of building a new school compared with upgrading and expanding the highly regarded existing Ebontvine School. This is probably the favoured option for most people. If this is really not possible, then the building of a new larger school to replace Ebontvine School on the Darren Farm site is an option that is likely to find favour. The consultation document rules out the Darren Farm site on the basis of timing, but based on my inquiries, I don't believe any discussions have been held with Taylor Wimpey management with regard to making the site available early. It must be in the interest of Taylor Wimpey in terms of marketing the houses. I'd now like to speak briefly about the all-through school idea. It's abundantly clear that those responsible for putting forward these proposals are determined to create an all-through school in Cowbridge. So far as I am aware, there is no democratic mandate for all-through schools being the preferred option for schooling within the Vale of Glamorgan. There is no Vale of Glamorgan.
That's 1 minute left.
Sorry? There is no
You've got
Vale
1 minute.
Yeah, there is no Vale of Glamorgan Council agreed policy, and based on the first consultation, the local population are clearly not in favour. Before such an important policy is implemented, it should be adopted democratically by the Vale of Glamorgan Council. Therefore, I urge this committee to recommend that the issue of future English medium primary education in Cowbridge be referred back for further consideration. In particular, the matter of whether an all-through school is a preferred policy or not should be separated from the need to determine how best to provide for the demand for English medium primary school places in Cowbridge. Thank you for listening.
Excellent, thank you very much. Any questions to the... Okay, thank you very much, John. And now we can move on to our last speaker.
Mr. Millard, are you able to hear us and can we hear you?
Hi there, can you hear me okay?
Yes, wonderful. And I would just like to clarify, on the handouts tab in everyone's control panels now, there is now a document you can view with Heather's statement in it, and I do apologise for the audio issues that we had previously. Mr. Millard, as previously, it'll be 3 minutes when you start speaking, and I will interject just to let you know when it's 1 minute to go. Take it away.
Thank you. My name's Neil. I'm a parent of a child at Ebontvine, just so you know where I'm coming from. The original proposal by 21st Century Schools had little or no evidence to support its case. It fell quite well short when considering locations for a new Ebontvine. And when the obvious flaws are pointed out by parents, they essentially threw their hands in the air saying, "You're on your own." Indeed, the next word that we had was that there are 7 other schools facing worse conditions than Ebontvine, and as such, it will be a long time before Ebontvine sees any investment. Even the most basic cost-benefit analysis illuminates the glaring inconsistencies in the logic. This new proposal, like the last one, appears to be built on rapidly changing supposition. There's little or no evidence to support what is evidently a blatantly inefficient use of public money. Building an additional primary school at an estimated cost of £5 million for what is, based on best guess, 25 students in the first year, and just within 800 metres of an existing primary school, which caters for 200 actual students and has a £500,000 backlog in maintenance, it should be inconceivable, really, that can even happen. Despite this somewhat extraordinary proposal, various consultations, time and resources involved in getting us to this stage, I haven't seen a plan outlining how 21st century schools, or anyone else for that matter, will resolve the shortfalls and the challenges faced by Ebontvine, as well as the other 7 schools mentioned. 21st century schools has got a responsibility for all schools, and specifically an onus to focus on those in poor condition. Indeed, it's the first thing you see when you go to the 21st century schools website. A long-term investment for schools and colleges to develop them as hubs for learning and reduce buildings in poor condition. So the question then becomes, is 21st century schools failing Ebontvine and the others, or is there a specific plan for them? Lots of parents of children at Ebontvine would like to know how and when you will fulfil your responsibility to your current charges at Ebontvine.
1 minute.
Thank you. That's me finished, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Neil. Does anyone have any questions for Neil? Can't see anyone with any hands up. Thank you very much, Neil, and thank you to all our speakers this evening. And now, finally, I would like to open it up to the floor. Does anyone have any questions, or does any of the officers would like to speak? Councillor Sandra Perks.
Hi, I'd just like to ask the officers how they feel that the schools that we already have that are from 3 to 19, how they actually operate. I know from visiting Bro Morgannwg that the primary, even though it's on the same site as the comprehensive, is a separate actual building, but how the schools interact with one another and what benefits there are for the pupils. I know that one of the that Heather Waddell was concerned about the age groups mixing together, but whether there's benefits to them actually mixing together. If anyone can give me an answer to that, please.
Matthew?
I was just going to say that in terms of Bro Morgannwg, just to cover the bit that you said about the buildings, it would be a similar approach on the Cowbridge all through school, in that we would construct a new 210 place primary school. It would be safeguarded in terms of it would have a fence around it and intercom access and safeguard pupils. It would have its own external area in terms of a multi-use games area, external provision outside of all of the classrooms on the ground floor, and it would also have green space and habitat areas. So it would, in effect, provide everything that a standalone primary school that we would construct would have. But yeah, just to reference the point about there are benefits to the all-through school model about that interaction between primary and secondary phases, although it can't be a free-for-all. There has to be safeguarding in place, and that needs to be managed by the staff. But what we see in Bro Morgannwg is ambassadors from the secondary phase that go down to the primary phase in terms of that interaction, to talk to them about the secondary education side and the facilities available. We see timetabled sharing of facilities. In a secondary school, you do get far larger array of facilities because they're larger schools with larger pupils in. So at Cowbridge Comprehensive School, you have a fitness suite, you have an activity and dance studio, you have a forecourt sports hall, you have specialised classrooms in terms of science, art, DT that could be timetabled to support the primary phase. And then the other benefit that you have in the all-through school model, if you have those specialisms in the teaching and learning that focus on those special areas like science, like DT, that can share that knowledge and come down to the primary phase. And that is a huge benefit in terms of the education.
Paula?
Yeah, Matthew's covered this quite well, but I would just like to add that members of the committee might recall that the first time we brought, we brought the first proposal then to Scrutiny Committee, that the head teacher of Bro Morgannwg actually attended committee to talk about the benefits of the all-through model. And also with your papers, there is a written submission from Cowbridge School, which also outlines some of the opportunities. So that'll give you an additional flavour then for some of those benefits.
Councillor Norman?
Could the officers explain how they intend to transport the children from the Darren farm site down to the new building, especially the very young children, if families don't have access to a vehicle?
Yeah. So firstly, I suppose the first key point to raise is that this school isn't specifically designed, although the reason for the proposal is to meet demand as a result of expansions in the area in terms of the housing development. It's not a school that's specifically designed to meet the needs of pupils at Clare Garden Village. The catchment area would mirror that of Yvonne Primary School, and pupils and parents would be able to indicate a preference for either Yvonne Primary School or the all through school as well. You can make, I think, 3 preferences for education when you submit an application for reception. So they would be able to apply for either. Obviously, Yvonne is that little bit closer to them, so they could put that as their first preference. If either school are oversubscribed with preferences, then that would be ranked by the oversubscription criteria. In relation to school transport, we provide transport to anybody who is more than 2 miles from in walking distance from their primary school. So the majority of Clare Garden Village, to my knowledge, is within the 2-mile walking distance. But obviously that would have to be mapped out when we know where all the footpaths, pavements are within that village, to determine the specific houses, how far away they are. But yes, under 2 miles they would be considered in walking distance, and we would obviously look at active travel measures and how we encourage behaviour change as much as possible. Anybody over that 2 miles would be entitled to free school transport if they were attending their nearest suitable school. And that would be provided, depending on numbers, probably through a minibus if there were a number of children that were in that outer area.
Okay. Does anyone else have any questions? Councillor Kemp, and then Councillor Perks.
Yeah, not so much questions, but some points to make. One thing I'd certainly welcome as far as this matter coming back before committee today from the matter we discussed something like 12 months ago is that it's nice that the people's views in the consultation have been listened to. I've experienced of a school where consultation took place and none of the views really seem to have been listened to, but I won't drag Llancarvan into it all the time. I wasn't happy last year with the proposal for the all-through school. The director has referred obviously to the favourable comments by Cowbridge Comprehensive, but to quote, they would say that anyway, wouldn't they? The same as we had last year, when again we had praise for the system from someone operating the system. Last year we were told, and we've been told again this evening, that this idea of an all-through school is fantastic, all the opportunities it gives to youngsters, etc., etc. But this proposal tonight is now taking that opportunity away from the 210 that are going to stay at a school at a Bontvine, which is in not particularly good condition. And we've heard it, I think it needs something like £500,000 spent on it to carry out essential repairs. I just feel, and I agree with some of the comments being made by the speakers we had earlier, that I'm not sure this is a great use of public money. You know, at the very worst, I would see we should have a Bontvine improved so it can become a 420 site pupil school if necessary. I appreciate the difficulties that have been expressed, how difficult it is to carry out work on the existing site, still trying to run a school there, but I really feel that we are not properly addressing what the needs of children in Cowbridge are. We seem to have now gone from the proposal last year to a really sort of a hybrid proposal where we now give opportunity to some children, not to others, on the basis of this idea of an all-through school being fantastic. What concerns me about the concept, or one thing that concerns me about the concept of an all-through school is this effectively that, and we've been told that the management team, how good the management team is at Cowbridge Comprehensive, but that is a management team that has run a comprehensive school. As far as I'm aware, I stand to be corrected, they don't have the experience of running a primary school, which they're going to have to take on board pupils going down to nursery level from the age of 3. So I can't say that I'm happy at all with the proposals that are being for us tonight.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Perks, then Councillor Thomas, and then Councillor, well, is that?
Just a couple of other points that the speakers brought up, and I wondered if the officers can perhaps address their concerns that they have. So they did talk about the pavement issues going from sort of the Cowbridge to the comprehensive. Would that sort of be addressed as if there's younger children sort of attending that school? Would it be something that's looked at? you know, to see whether, you know, if parents are taking younger children along there, whether that's addressed. But also, just to go back to what Councillor Kemp said, if I remember rightly from last year, a Bontvine isn't a large enough site to have a 420 pupils on it. Is that correct, or am I mistaken? I don't know whether the officers can address that for me, please.
Paula, the hand up.
Yeah, I'd like to address the first point that Councillor Perks raised. As part of this, if the proposal went ahead, a travel plan would be drafted, and there are a number of options that we can look at for developing safe routes to school. In fact, in developing the proposal, we made sure that there were alternative routes that could be brought into play if this goes ahead.
And yeah, I would just add that in addition to the funding that we have for the project, there is also additional Section 106 contributions to support active travel and community facilities that we would obviously look to tie into the project wherever possible. We recently did that in St David's in Colwinston. There were concerns from residents about the local transport, and there was some Section 106 funding that we took into the project now so that we could provide improved highway infrastructure in terms of a crossing area and more pavements. We have done that on previous schemes, and we would look to do it here. And it would be a key component of planning as well, the safe walking routes and the promotion of active travel. And then just to pick up on the second point, I suppose it's always a difficult one in terms of, is it big enough? Because there are guidelines on how big a site should be for the number of pupils, but there are also confined sites where that can be made smaller. The existing Bontvine site is reasonably large, and I think it would meet minimum requirements for a 420 place primary school if required. The main concern from our perspective is that it does have a sloping site, so you immediately lose around an acre of the site in terms of that topography because of the slope on the top and on the east and west of the site. So that makes it difficult. There's not very many options for where you could put a school building. It would probably have to be directly behind the school, which is where their running track is. If you know the site, that's very close to the existing building, and the main concern for us are the two things in terms of the impact, in terms of what we would need to do to the local highway, because it's right off a residential street, what we'd be required to do out there in terms of meeting requirements for planning would considerably increase cost, and in terms of procuring a contractor, the access for construction would be extremely limited and would potentially include high risks which come with a financial implication when we tender as well. So we don't think it's feasible. The only way we could really build a 420 place on that site would be to demolish the existing building and then to build a new school. Again, that comes with considerable cost because we would need to relocate all the pupils and staff from that school for the 18-month build process. And we would still remain with the issues of the residential street and the highway surrounding that building that we would also need to account for. And obviously that would also delay the implementation as well, which would have concerns for timescales for pupil demand.
Thank you. Councillor Thomas.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I note that this is for updating the committee and for us to express views rather than to vote for any recommendations, I believe. A year ago, this committee recognised the approaching needs to increase the number of primary places in Cowbridge. When this came up, then the ambition was to increase the capacity of a Bontvine from 210 to 420. But that would involve actually moving a Bontvine from its present location into the grounds of Cowbridge Comp, because the capacity at a Bontvine's present site, as has just been mentioned, isn't conducive to doing that at all. Bontvine parents and governors were strongly opposed to that issue, and so as I understand it, Cabinet made the decision to roll back and look at it again. But it still leaves us with the need to provide a further 210 places, or a 210 place school in this part of the county. The present Abontfine, hang on, we're already a year to 18 months behind in meeting the needs that are approaching in terms, or are already with us, in fact, in terms of the needs for primary places in Cowbridge. And this is just going to get worse. We need to be moving forward now and providing those 210 potential places. I think it's critical for the children of Cowbridge. We discussed the concept of an all-through school again at that meeting just under a year ago, and it was generally recognised that the areas around Britain where all-through schools exist, including the examples we have in our own county, are successful models and have good records. Cowbridge itself, Cowbridge Comp is an excellent school, and I can only imagine that the primary school will benefit from their expertise. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Thomas, and on to Isaac. Did you would like to take a minute?
I think one thing that I want to say is that this is definitely a conversation that's happening amongst young people in particular. And I've noticed that because we've all kind of decided that this is a possible way forward that I think that local authorities and the Welsh Government will have to decide on, because obviously we're getting to the point where older schools, they need higher maintenance, or is it worth putting resources together and building schools on secondary school sites, for example. But one thing is with in particular the Bro Morgannwg site, is that the pupils from the primary school and the secondary school on a day-to-day basis, obviously there's a fence there, but they just carry on their day as normal. And there are opportunities for secondary school pupils to get work experience in the nursery if they wish to go into childcare. And there's also chances for the primary school to get a feel of what the secondary school's like and also use all the facilities. And I think that also as a young person, I do understand all the points that are being made, and I think it does need to get moved forward a bit, because this has been going on for so long in different scenarios, and I understand that it might be difficult to expand on the current site, but then we've got to kind of discuss the risks of possibly making it a joint site, so on the Cowbridge site, because there's not that many alternatives, because it is the more rural Vale. There's not an unlimited land plot. That's me done.
Thank you. Leighton? Councillor Rowlands?
Thank you, Joe. I just wanted to ask Matthew, and I think it was Councillor Andrew from Town Council mentioned in relation to obviously there's going to be a brand new school at Cowbridge, and then there's going to be obviously the existing school, which will be old and in repair, and needs repairing quite a lot by the looks of it. Is there a plan to repair the old school at all if this went ahead?
So as I kind of mentioned in my part, there are two areas of this that are separate in terms of the development of proposals for BAMP B, which is a strategic investment program where we have to plan for a 5-year program, and then the second part of it is our asset renewal, where of course the priority is addressing condition of school buildings. That is the sole aim of it. But that one we have to obviously consider all of the schools across the Vale, and it's an annual program that we take to full council every February as part of the capital program approval. So we will start developing our proposals for the next year's asset renewal now over the next couple of months. months. That will go to full council then in February. As I said, we just need to read the condition surveys, look at the schemes that are the highest priority in terms of address them. So if the condition of a bond fine is poor, it has backlog maintenance, so it would be looked at for schemes for the next few years of asset renewal, and there has been investment to bring the backlog maintenance down over the last couple of years. I think they've had over 100,000 over the past year or two. The issue that we have is, of course, we give schools funding through the schools funding formula. We allocate an area of that funding for repairs and maintenance. However, schools rightly spend a lot of that funding on the core education purposes. So we do see ongoing annual reduction in funding, in spend on repairs and maintenance from a school perspective, and that's how backlog maintenance accrues over time.
Councillor Burnett, did you want to come back in?
Hang on. Yes, if I can. I just need to see if I can get there. We are. Just a couple of things to clarify. Matt talked about asset renewal. We've been very fortunate in the last couple of years that Welsh Government have actually put some extra sums into school asset renewal. I think last year it was about 1.9 million. And there is a list. Anyone who is on, whether it be this scrutiny or corporate resources and performance, will look at the capital programme every year and see the huge amount of work that we do, particularly over the summer holidays, but normally programmed through school holidays. And I know that when we went through the original consultation, the discussion had been had that there was actually a sizable chunk of money had just been spent on a Bontvine. The asset renewal programme is obviously done in terms of priority, but I can't see there being any reason why it wouldn't still be included in that. What I would also say is that when there was a discussion about, so, what do we do next? It was very plain that there is an intention, when it is possible, to provide a new school for a Bontvine within the discussions on this. Now, it might be that it would need Yolo to move up to Clare Gardens to provide sort of wriggle room on that site, but it's not a question of, oh no, that's it, you're never ever going to get a new school. We're hopeful that there will be Band C of 21st century schools, and we would be putting that forward. The whole point about this is to discuss a proposal to increase the number of primary school places in Cowbridge. That's what it's about, bearing in mind the outcomes of the previous consultation, which stated that that there was a strong feeling that a Bontvine wanted to stay on the same location and be the same size. And so this is why we have this proposal, which is being brought forward to committee as part of that consultation.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. Do we have anyone else? I think we're coming to the end of this agenda item. So, reading the agenda item, the line is to endorse the proposals in the report. Does anyone have anything they would like to bring up before we move on?
Move the proposals.
I'm happy to second it.
Second.
Okay. Thank you very much, everyone. Now we can move on to the next agenda item, which is number 5, which is another reference, which is the Welsh Language Standards Annual Monitoring Report 2019 to 2020. Who's going to take this? Tom?
I'm going to take this in if that's okay, Chair. Good evening, everybody. Thank you for having me this evening. This is a reference from Cabinet of the 2019-20 Annual Welsh Language Monitoring Report. We ordinarily would have brought this to Cabinet and to Committee in the early summer, but because of the pandemic, it was slightly delayed. But in order to make sure that we met the statutory obligation, a draft of this was published by the end of June. It is a statutory report. It contains two appendices. The first is the annual monitoring report against the Welsh language standards and the actions that we take to progress those standards. The second appendix is the promotional strategy that the Council has, and the purpose of that is to promote the use of the Welsh language across a range of settings, including internally and externally to the Council. The report is relatively detailed in the sense that it gives you an overview of the actions that are being taken to address the standards and the progress that's been made, and does that for both the Welsh language standards and the promotional strategy itself. I think it's fair to say that a significant amount of work has continued and will continue in the coming year. And the purpose of bringing it to the committee this evening is so that any views on any aspects of the report can be fed back to Cabinet, who've endorsed this in principle, subject to your views. And once they've then considered any views of the committee, they would then look to endorse the report, and it would then be published on the Council's website. That's an overview for you, Chair.
Okay, thank you very much. Tom, does anyone have any questions? Sounds very quiet here. Okay, would Gareth or Catherine, is it just for noting?
I think if members have to endorse the report, Chair, I think that would be more appropriate.
Okay. Are we happy
I'd like to move the recommendations.
Second.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Now we are on to reference number 6, which is the coronavirus recovery strategy. Reference from Cabinet on the 21st of September. Tom, is this you again?
If Paula is happy, perhaps I could give you the introduction to it, and then she could add to it from an education perspective, if that would be useful.
I can certainly try, Tom.
It's better that way around, I promise, Paula. Thank you for taking this reference as well, Chair. This is the Council's recovery strategy, which is appended to the Cabinet report. At last month's committee, you saw the first 2/3 of this report. So you considered the Council's initial response and transition, and we also talked at committee about the way that the recovery strategy was being built up. As events are unfolding in the past few days, it's particularly important, I suppose, to refer to the diagram in the recovery strategy that shows that actually this is not going to be a linear process. We are going to go back and forth between various different phases of our response, transition, and then recovery. And as a result, the recovery strategy is by its very nature quite a long-term document. I won't go through a massive amount of the detail that's in here, but it's been built up through a series of conversations that have been held with our colleagues internally, with our colleagues across the public sector in the Vale of Glamorgan and wider, and it's been informed by the Welsh Government's recovery work as well. The report itself has got two particularly important pieces of analysis work that underpin some of this, and I think this is of particular relevance to your committee, Chair, because of the equalities aspect of the terms of reference with your committee. So you'll see reference in the strategy to a community impact assessment. And this is a significant body of work that the policy team have worked to compile with colleagues, which looks at the particular aspects and impacts that coronavirus has had on aspects of our community in the Vale of Glamorgan from the perspective of the different protected characteristics. You'll hear lots of talk about the impact of the way that the virus is particularly impacting on on members of our Black and minority ethnic community, on age, and particularly in areas of deprivation as well. And it's really important that we understand exactly the kind of impact that this is having across the Vale of Glamorgan on as micro level as possible. So that's one piece of work that underpins the strategy, and that will be updated and is available to elected members to have a look at. The second piece is a piece of analysis around the economic impact. It's quite stark that the unemployment figures, for example, that were released this week shows that unemployment has doubled in the last 7 months within our communities, significant rises in universal credit claimants, and we're starting to see the economic impact and obviously the socio-economic impact of coronavirus as well. So it's important that we understand the context within which this strategy has been written. So the report, I mean, I promise it's by sheer coincidence that we have 19 priorities for our coronavirus or COVID-19 recovery strategy, but there are 19 strategic priorities to progress. They're going to be progressed in the next month or so. They're going to be progressed over the next few months and then into the coming years. And you'll see that there are some of those recovery strategy priorities that are particularly relevant to your committee. So looking at establishing schools to be safe places to learn, to be making sure that public spaces are accessible to all people from across our community. And for example, making sure that we engage and consult with residents when we're making changes to the way that our services operate. So strategy is around our full wellbeing objectives. It means that there's some strategic congruence with the work that we're doing. For the coming months, Paula, for example, within Learning and Skills, has developed a directorate plan to get us through the next 6 months. Once we get into the new financial year, all of this work will be subsumed within the council's annual delivery plan, so that there'll be one way of monitoring and tracking all of this activity. So I suppose the reason for bringing it to committee this evening is to make you aware of the breadth and depth of the work that is underway to support recovery, and also then to enable you to identify if there are any particular aspects of the recovery strategy that as a committee perhaps you might like to focus future scrutiny activity on. So that's a bit of an overview of the strategy.
Thank you, Tom. Paula?
I won't add too much because I think Tom's already touched on some of it, but obviously our focus in terms of recovery is going to be on keeping our schools open safely and continuing to provide support for all pupils, but particularly vulnerable pupils. And we've seen in particular that COVID so far has had a significant impact, I'd say, on pupils from deprived backgrounds. So it's ensuring that they have full access to education, equitable access. And members will be aware that we had, during lockdown, provided pupils with IT equipment and Wi-Fi access and so on. I think now that pupils are back in school, it's significantly more difficult when we have pupils, for instance, who need to isolate to ensure that they have got equitable access, because you have teaching staff who are trying to teach in school and then have an element of distance learning going on as well. There are professional learning needs for staff, which is being addressed. And we have learned a lot, but nevertheless, blended learning, as we call it, is still going to be a significant challenge. So schools are developing their blended learning plans, which are being brought into play as pupils go off on isolation. What I would say is that at the start of term, not all pupils came back to school, and so we have a significant number. I think it's around 250 off the top of my head that didn't return, and various reasons, but one of those is that there's a certain amount of anxiety amongst parents about them returning to school in these conditions. And so we're carrying out a significant amount of work to ensure that we work with schools to keep those pupils engaged. At the moment, you'll be aware possibly that we're not able to issue fines for non-attendance at schools in the current circumstances. And we're getting quite a high, not high number, but higher than we would have expected of parents saying, well, I'm going to electively home educate. So there are concerns there. So we're working with those parents to ensure that we try and keep them engaged so that we don't lose them altogether. So a lot of focus there. And then in the background, there's the business as usual. So we are continuing to prepare for the introduction of the new curriculum in September 2022. So working with schools to ensure that that development is ongoing. And also there's the ALN Act, the implementation of that, and continuing that work too with schools. So significant challenges there. Tom touched upon the unemployment stats. And of course, we are ramping up the work that we're doing with young people to prevent them not being in education, employment or training, because there, I think, is huge possibility that we're going to see a significant increase, and are seeing a significant increase in unemployment in that younger age group. And also working through communities for work, for instance, and through our adult community learning, basic skills support for unemployed, and getting back to work, or getting back on track scheme that we run through adult community learning. So a lot going on. I suppose it's going to be business as usual on top of responding to the fallout from COVID. I'm saying fallout sort of optimistically. I am, I suppose, assuming that it will come to an end at some point, but it is hugely challenging. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Councillor Thomas.
Yeah, I'm not sure I count on it coming to an end in any foreseeable timescale. Paula, you mentioned the number of people that are now homeschooling their kids. It's now about 150, I think you said. What supervision or interrogation are we able to give to the nature of that homeschooling, and whether it is in fact appropriate, and whether it's in fact happening?
Yeah, and you raise a very good point there, Councillor Thomas, and I can see Morwen has put her hand up to respond to that.
Yeah, thanks, Paula. Thanks, Councillor. It is difficult. It is something that's always happened, that we do have an officer whose responsibility is to oversee EHE, as is referred to, elective home education. And at the moment, it's not about evaluating what parents are doing, but it is looking at how we can support them so that they can effectively deliver an education that is appropriate. Not all families are receptive to support or need it, but we do everything we possibly can. So there are visits, at least termly. There is engagement with the families and the young people themselves to make sure that we are doing everything we can, continuing to do everything we can to support them and as well as we possibly can. It's not quite 150. Our figures have gone up by just under 30 from, it was about 81, 82 last academic year at the end of. So we're talking about a 30% increase approximately so far. And those are the ones just this term where the paperwork has all been finalised. What we are fearful of is that once Welsh Government reintroduce fixed penalty notices, that more parents may then choose to take their children out of school and electively home educate them. We are fortunate though that in the Vale, schools have been working proactively with us and with parents and families too, to engage children. So even where, as Paula has said, there are children who are not returned, haven't yet returned to school, schools have continued to provide online learning opportunities for the children to engage them in education, hoping that they are going to return to school. I know that in some other local authorities, they've had quite a hard line where they've said if they don't return to school, then they have no choice. They have to electively home educate them and take them off roll. But obviously, that is without, that would cause lots of problems as well, because there will be parents who are fearful at the moment, but will choose that their children will re-enter education at some point. But if they take them out of school now, those places may not be there when they choose to take them back into school sometime down the line.
Thank you. Isaac, you want to?
I just wanted to say really that from personal experience that I had to self-isolate at one point because of a confirmed case in my school bubble. I think one thing that schools have done excellently, and this is across a lot of schools, is blended learning. So obviously that you've got issue with some parents saying that their kids are not going back to school, but also for circumstances that can't be avoided, schools are actually really proactively trying to blend it. So I've been back a week now and there's been a bit of catch up, but every day I've gone onto the laptop and there's been work there. And from what I can tell, that's been all across the Vale and not just in my school. And I think that's really great because there is fear. I mean, it's got to a point where people are trying to live with the virus, but that can't be with everyone. But schools are really trying their best from personal experience.
David, would you like to, before Councillor Thomas?
Just responding to Isaac, really, it's really encouraging to hear, because it is a major challenge that's facing schools and one which we as officers are very concerned about. But it is clear that a lot of progress has been made very, very quickly. Obviously, I think there's a long way to go with it, and because the blended learning offer has to meet the needs of all pupils, including those with additional learning needs, and that becomes even more challenging. But certainly a lot of progress has been made, and to hear Isaac's comments is really heartening.
Okay, Councillor Thomas.
Yeah, I was going to say that about Isaac as well. I mean, that is encouraging. It was good to hear. I'm getting messages all over my alerts and stuff that the Welsh Government are about to, or in the next day or so, will be announcing the circuit breaker. And I'm just wondering where we're standing on that. If presumably it's going to involve half term and either a week before or after, but then we've got to look at things like free school meals and kids that are going to need support and so on throughout that. How prepared we are for it. Thank you.
Paula?
Okay, so There has been some discussion, obviously, about a circuit breaker, but at the moment it's not clear what that means for schools. So there has been some talk about primary schools going back after the week-long half term, so that we don't have to put childcare in place. But that secondary schools might only open partially. This is what we're hearing. Now, that would mean, for instance, year 7, 8 and 9 going back and the rest being taught through distance learning. We would be opposed to that. It would be extremely difficult for school staff who teach across all year groups to maintain that sort of model. But also, in our view, it just feels like those that are in the exam years are being just, you know, forgotten. And we're hugely concerned about that. We guess that that's come about because of the science around transmission. But at the moment, it seems as though Welsh Government they're not clear really about what they're going to do, and not clear about the duration of that circuit break either. So they're talking about, I think they started talking about 2 weeks, but you know, you wouldn't see the impact of that after 2 weeks. Then we're seeing them starting talking about 2 to 3 weeks, so we don't know how long that would go on. We're going to be briefing our head teachers at 8 o'clock tomorrow morning to inform them of this, because we're expecting possibly an announcement tomorrow at around midday. We don't know is the truth when Welsh Government will come out with any sort of announcement, but we wanted to warn our head teachers first that something's coming, but we don't know exactly what it's going to be.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else? Councillor Perksley, your hand up.
Hi, I wanted to ask a little bit more around sort of the support that pupils are having with trying to gain employment and things like that, and obviously the effect that COVID has had on people doing work experience and gaining that sort of thing through the careers advice sort of work within schools, and how we manage sort of trying to get our pupils ready for the workplace, and the possibility of how they could do sort of work experience and things like that as well.
Maureen?
Yeah, thanks, Councillor. I haven't got an answer to all of that, unfortunately, and I think some of it is going to develop as the time goes on. However, at our YEP board last week, which I chair, which is with Careers Wales and other partners as well, interestingly, Careers Wales is seeing far more footfall from young people than it ever has done, because the meetings are virtual, and it must be that for young people, they're preferring the remote way of accessing support. Where they're seeing a difference is the over 24s, but for young people, actually, it has been one of the plus points, if you like, of the pandemic, that they are now accessing support that they weren't previously accessing. But I think it will be a difference. I know that the increase in claims for universal credit has gone up quite significantly, and you know, young people 18 to 24s, particularly in that bracket, has been quite high across the Vale of Morgan. Schools are doing everything they can to still support the young people, and I know the Careers Service, Careers Wales, is still working actively with our schools too. I'm afraid I can't answer any more than that, though. Now,
David?
Just to add to that, in terms of the 18 to 24 age group, there is some funding available from Welsh Government. I think the scheme's called Kickstart, and there are a number of opportunities for 18 to 24-year-olds being identified to be linked to employment for 6 months, and that's both within the council and the wider Vale generally. So there are schemes that are trying to address, you know, the undoubted very difficult situation that young people are finding themselves in. Yeah, so there is work going on, Councillor Perks, but obviously it's a difficult situation.
Thank you. Anyone else? If not, okay. Are we happy to endorse what has come through? Everyone seems all happy and quiet here.
We have a second, sorry, Chair, and a second to that, please.
Yeah,
I'll second that.
Got a couple there. Okay, thank you very much, and thank you for everyone who put work into that report, and thank you to everyone in the council as well. Very much appreciated. Thank you. Okay, on to the penultimate agenda item, which is a report of the Director of Learning and Skills, which is the proposal to establish a new Centre for Learning and Wellbeing and a specialist resource base at Gladstone Primary School, which will be managed by Ysgol from September 2021. Okay, who will be taking this on? Is this you, Matt? Give the introduction.
I believe so.
Okay.
Thank you, Chair. So yeah, similar to the Cowbridge proposal, this report has come to scrutiny to provide feedback as part of the consultation exercise. The key difference between this one and the Cowbridge proposal is that the original approval to consult was via the coronavirus emergency powers procedure, as it was when there were no cabinet meetings, which is why it's a separate report rather than a reference. So saying, just to give a short overview of the proposal and the feedback that we've received to date. On the 9th of July, the Managing Director approved the strategy to transform education in the Vale, and that's to meet projected future demand and also to best meet the needs of our most vulnerable learners. So there were three key elements to that strategy. One was to establish a Centre for Learning and Wellbeing, which will replace the DITE, the Council's Pupil Referral Unit. To establish specialist resource bases in mainstream schools to ensure learners can continue to access mainstream education with additional support, and also finally to increase the capacity of Ysgol to meet future demand. So the strategy will be progressed through separate consultation exercises and individual proposals will be developed. But at the same time, we also had approval to consult on the establishment of the Centre for Learning and Wellbeing. So on the 7th of September, we launched the consultation through publishing the consultation document. Specifically, the proposal has three key elements to it. So that's formally establishing the specialist resource base that's at Gladstone Primary School, which would operate as a satellite to Ysgol from September 21. Secondly, discontinuing a DITE and establishing a new Centre for Learning and Wellbeing, which would also be managed by Ysgol from September 21. And then finally, constructing a new building for the Centre for Learning and Wellbeing on the Court Road Depot site on Barry, which would be ready for January 2023. So the consultation is due to end now in a couple of days on the 18th of October, and that's been run in accordance with the School Standards and Organisation Wales Act. So I'll just give a bit more background on the three key elements of the proposal. So in terms of the specialist resource base, the Loft and the Borough at Gladstone Primary School provide support for pupils displaying complex social, emotional and mental health difficulties for foundation phase and key stage 2 pupils. This was set up on a trial basis from September 2019. It's overseen by a team of trauma-informed practitioners, which includes specialist teachers, LSAs and other specialist therapists who work with pupils and their parents to target difficulties relating to pupils' behaviour. The provision, as I said, has been piloted over the last academic year and a half and has been highly successful in meeting the needs of pupils with such complex needs. And prior to the development of this, we didn't have such a facility in the Vale and would likely be requiring external placements for these pupils if they weren't able to continue in mainstream education. The purpose of it being managed by Ysgolhaig is to ensure that consistent approach across the Vale, as they are seen as the specialists in terms of this trauma-informed approach. And there are also benefits of this small resource base for 10 pupils being part of a larger organisation with improved resilience, opportunities for staff professional development and such. Then the second part then is the creation of the Centre for Learning and Wellbeing. So a DITE is the Council's pupil referral unit. It provides education for children by reasons of illness, exclusion or otherwise may not receive such education in mainstream school, and it currently splits provision across Amelia Trust Farm and a school building in Cowbridge, with Key Stage 3 pupils in Amelia Trust and Key Stage 4 pupils at Cowbridge. So change in terms of the approach to the pupil referral unit has been on the cards and considered for quite a number of years now. So it was originally proposed that we'd construct a Centre for Behavioural Excellence alongside Whitmore High School. The reason why that changed is when we did more work in terms of the provision that we would like to see, there wasn't enough external space to support that provision on what is already a confined site. So we explored a range of options across the Vale, and we also changed the name to the Centre for Learning and Wellbeing to support that provision. So it would look to adopt a trauma-informed approach, and that's to meet the needs of those learners who've experienced abuse, neglect or other significant trauma, which has profoundly affected their behaviour. As I said, to the specialist resource base, it's recognised that Ysgolhaig are that organisation with the experience and skills, and that can be done consistently across the Vale, not just with the Centre for Learning and Wellbeing and the specialist resource base, but also by supporting our mainstream schools. And again, it was also the benefits to the resilience and the professional development that were the key areas why we determined that Ysgolhaig should look after this provision. And that approach also aligns with our social, emotional and mental health action plan. So the third part and final part of the proposal is the new building on the Court Road site. The existing buildings that I mentioned earlier, Amelia Trust Farm and Cowbridge, are in poor condition with limited external space. And that has been raised by Estin previously. The Cowbridge site is also unable to provide full-time provision for Key Stage 4 pupils, so they have a blend of on-site provision and external provision. So the new building would be a much needed investment in our most vulnerable pupils. It would be a £4.4 million investment in total, with 3.3 million coming from Welsh Government 21st Century Schools funding. It would ensure that they have buildings that are fit for the needs of the pupils, and would also ensure full-time provision could be provided for Key Stage 4 pupils. It would accommodate around 60 pupils in total, and there would be external sporting areas, external play facilities, improved access, and would have opportunities to enhance vocational provision and provide a wider curriculum, because we'd have on-site workshops that we can use that are already there for the depot, which have only recently been put in. And it's also worth noting that 60% of the pupils who are currently transported to a DITE are from the Barry area, so there would also be a positive impact in terms of transport, with more pupils being able to walk and cycle to school, and also shorter journeys for those who continue to be transported. In terms of the response to date, we asked consultees to note whether they were in support, not support or no opinion, and we did that across the 3 different strands of the consultation. So in relation to part 1, which is the specialist resource base, we've received 34 responses, 79% in favour, 3% do not support, and then just the 18% then who expressed no opinion either way. With the creation of the Centre for Learning and Wellbeing being managed by Ysgolhaig, again 34 responses, 85% in favour, 6% not in favour, and 6% no opinion either way. And then finally with the building, as we would expect, 94% supporting that, with 3% not supporting and 3% showing no opinion either way. Like with the Cowbridge one, the important part is the issues that are raised as part of the consultation. We have had very little in terms of issues being raised to this consultation, but the 4 key areas are not losing the skills and expertise of the existing DICE staff, making sure that pupils who are in education otherwise than at school are considered as part of the proposal. There were some comments that maybe the capacity needs to be re-looked at as it might not be sufficient. And also some pupils during our pupil engagement session were just a little bit unsure about the title of a special school. So just to kind of comment on those individually, in terms of the skills and expertise of staff, you know, the council fully appreciates the hard work, skills and knowledge of the existing staff, and they would all transfer under the management of YYD from September 21 to make sure that we retain that knowledge and continuity for them and for the pupils. And again, as I mentioned earlier, there are benefits from a staff perspective in terms of that resilience and that professional development and that opportunities across a wider organisation. When it comes to the IOTAS provision, that would continue under the management of the council, and resources would be retained centrally by the Learning and Skills Directorate to manage that education otherwise than at school provision. So that wouldn't be missed as part of the proposal, it would stay centrally. And then with regards to the capacity, it's accommodating 60 pupils, which is consistent with the existing number on roll at a DICE. As I said before, the key benefit is that we would be able to provide full-time provision for Key Stage 4 pupils, and the new building would also be expandable in the future if required. It's quite a large site on the Court Road depot, so if we did need to expand the provision or provide alternative provision on that site, we would be able to do so within the existing footprint as part of Band C or Band D of the 21st Century Schools programme. And then just the final points with regards to the title of special school. It is proposed that it would form part of Ysgolor, but the provision would have its own building, it would have its own identity and name, yeah, so it would be separate. It wouldn't just be Ysgolor, it would be the Centre for Learning and Wellbeing or another name if that's selected when it opens. And yeah, the key thing there is the benefits that have been associated with that Ysgolor that I outlined below. And from a pupil's perspective, there are also benefits in terms of accessing wider facilities that are managed by Ysgolor. So that's really it in terms of where we are with the proposal. There is only a few days left, and it has been extremely positive in terms of the responses we've received to date, and from the staff and governors of the respective schools.
Thank you very much, Matthew. Would anyone like to add to Matthew, or does anyone have any questions? It's also very quiet here. If not, I'm happy to. Hi, David. Just know your hand up there.
Just to say that this is a massively positive development, I think, for the Vale Council, and one which we should be very proud of, that we're supporting the most vulnerable pupils that traditionally have not had the greatest amount of funding spent on them. So I think it's a real step forward.
Thank you. I echo those sentiments. Councillor Thomas.
Yeah, as a Penarth council, I'm immensely proud of Ysgolor and the work it's been doing. Hopefully we all saw the TV shows over the last few weeks highlighting the work that's been going on there and how remarkable they actually are. And we know that the number of pupils that are exhibiting need for that kind of provision seems to be on the increase and getting younger, and this seems like a very, very sensible way forward, and I endorse it and applaud it, and would like to move endorsement.
Okay.
Second.
Parker first, and then Councillor Kemp.
Yes, I would just support that as well. I think the television programme showed the commitment of the staff was actually quite, almost brought me to tears on a few occasions. Even though I'm getting very old, it was very, very, very beautifully presented, and I'd support the motion and second.
Councillor Kemp.
Yeah, no, I was just going to second the proposal. I think it's an excellent scheme, and you should, hopefully it will proceed and will become very successful.
Thank you very much, everyone. So
Councillor, I think Councillor Burnett would like to come in very quickly. She's indicated in the chat.
Sure thing.
Right, if I can. Here we go. Just to say that I'm really delighted that committee have taken this on board. It's been such a long-held ambition to develop a centre for learning and well-being, recognising that not all children fit the same mould, and that there has been a group of our children that have had challenges, whether that be, social, emotional behaviour, mental health issues, whatever, that maybe we needed to be providing more support. And the expertise that Aderi has got in terms of trauma-informed practice, which has already been seen with the pilot at the Loft in Gladstone School, is absolutely superb. So I completely support this and look forward to its delivery as soon as possible.
Excellent, thank you very much. Anyone else? Councillor Perks, your hand up.
I know that we've been talking about the PRU unit for some time, about trying to find the right home for it and things like that, and now actually, giving it a new name. And it's good to hear that it actually will be in Barry, where a lot of the pupils, sort of have had to travel to the Amelia Trust Farm, which has been fantastic for that time. But to actually have a, sort of state-of-the-art sort of building for pupils who need that extra support, I think is really important. I think I was going to ask a question, but I've actually lost my train of thought, so I'll leave that for another day. I can always email the officers, but thank you.
Thank you very much. So there was 2 recommendations, but I believe that we have already had a number of endorses, so I'll be happy that we move on to the last agenda item. Okay, thank you very much. And now we're on to agenda item 8, I should say, the Governor Training Report for the 2019 and 20 academic year. Lisa, is this your piece?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Chair. This report was previously requested by the Chair of the Scrutiny Committee and is now an annual item. It summarises the training delivered as well as the evaluations received to support our 850 school governors during last academic year. There are 2 appendices. Appendix 1 outlines the training provided last year and the evaluations received, and Appendix 2 is an example of the evaluation form. Although there's been in recent years an increase in online learning, traditionally governors training has tended to be delivered in person. Obviously, unfortunately, due to COVID-19 restrictions, only half of the number of training courses were able to be delivered last academic year, with no training at all possible from mid-March onwards. Having said that, a total of 15 courses were delivered, covering 10 different topics, ranging from the education updates and briefing sessions for chairs and experienced governors to induction training for newly appointed governors. Although some of the training offered was reduced, the evaluations received for these courses reflected a high level of satisfaction. An example of this relates to question 3, which is how effective were the course providers, the instructors themselves. And this question had the highest ever response rate, with over 98% of attendees indicating the trainers were good or very good. The details of the response rates to the various questions are summarised in the report, so I won't go into them with too much detail. And they're also provided alongside a year-on-year comparison, which indicates a pattern of high satisfaction, which has increased slightly over time. Obviously, going forward, bearing in mind the current circumstances, e-learning for all of the mandatory training elements will continue to be available, so that every opportunity is provided for governors to fulfil the mandatory requirements. The Directorate is also working closely with colleagues in Central South Consortium and elsewhere to finalise other opportunities for online training, with the first new governor induction webinar scheduled for next week for our new parent governors. In summary, there are a lot of opportunities for training being explored via a variety of sources, so we feel able to fulfil our commitments for this forthcoming academic year also. So thank you, Chair, that ends my brief summary of the report.
Thank you very much. Would anyone like to ask a question? Very quiet, okay. Thank you, Lisa. Thank you very much. I understand that the recommendation for this agenda item is just to note the report. Are we happy to
That's
note
correct,
it?
Chair.
Yeah, move me now.
Okay, do you have a seconder? Whether we second. Okay, Gordon, thank you. Okay, and now we can move on to any urgent items, which I don't, which is agenda item 9, and agenda 10 is the same, which I don't either. So that is the end of this scrutiny committee. Smack bang at 7 o'clock. Thank you very much, everyone who attended, and have a good evening.
Thank
you all.
you. Thank you.
Thank you,
Good
Chair.
night.
Thank you.
Bye now.
Thank
Thanks.
you.